Have you ever felt like giving up on learning English, or even giving up on your dream life? Years ago, when I first came to the United States, I felt lost, lonely, and close to quitting everything. But one cold morning, a homeless man smiled at me and said something simple that quietly changed my life. In this story, I'll share how that moment led me to love, family, and a deeper lesson about gratitude. The strange smile on a cold morning. Sometimes life changes in the quietest moments. Not during a big celebration. Not during a dramatic event. Just a small moment that almost looks ordinary. A short conversation. A passing smile. 3 simple words from someone you don't even know. That is exactly how this story begins. Years ago, during my first months living in the United States, my life felt confusing and uncertain. Everything around me was new, the streets, the language, the weather, even the rhythm of daily life. People often imagine moving to America as an exciting adventure. Bright cities. New opportunities. A better future. And sometimes that is true. But the beginning of that journey can feel very lonely. Especially when your English is still slow. You walk through stores and hear conversations everywhere. People talk quickly. They laugh. They respond without hesitation. Meanwhile, your brain is working very hard just to understand a few words. You catch something like morning, coffee, see you. The rest of the sentence disappears before your brain can translate it. Learning English in a real environment is very different from learning it in a classroom. In class, the teacher speaks slowly. The sentences are simple. Your brain has time to think. But in real life, language moves at the speed of life. Fast. Unpredictable. And sometimes overwhelming. Scientists actually explain this experience in a very simple way. When the brain is surrounded by a new language, it experiences what psychologists call cognitive overload. Your brain is trying to listen, translate, understand tone, read facial expressions, and respond at the same time. Imagine trying to solve a puzzle while riding a bicycle and answering questions at the same time. Your brain becomes tired very quickly. And when the brain becomes tired, something dangerous begins to grow quietly inside your thoughts. Doubt. You start asking silent questions. Why is this so difficult? Maybe I am too slow. Maybe I should stop trying. Many people who learn English feel this moment at least once. The motivation that felt strong at the beginning suddenly becomes heavy. But here is something interesting about how the human brain learns. The brain remembers stories much better than rules. Grammar rules often stay in short-term memory. They disappear after a few days. But emotional stories stay much longer. When a story connects to feelings, hope, fear, gratitude, the brain releases a chemical called dopamine. Dopamine helps the brain store memories more deeply. That is why stories are powerful for learning language. So today, instead of explaining grammar, I want to share a story. A real moment from my life. A moment that started with confusion, cold weather, and a man sitting alone on a bench. It was winter in America. The kind of winter that makes the air feel sharp when you breathe. The sidewalks were quiet, and the sky looked pale and tired. People walked quickly with their coats closed tightly. That morning I was walking to work. My hands were deep inside my pockets because the wind was strong. At that time my life in America was still new. I was still learning how things worked here, how people talked, how they greeted strangers, how conversations started. In many cultures, people begin conversations directly. But in America, something interesting happens. People often begin with small talk. Simple comments about the weather. Nice day. Cold morning. Busy today. These little sentences are not very important by themselves. But they create a comfortable bridge between two strangers. That morning I noticed someone sitting near a bus stop. He was an older man, maybe in his 60s. His jacket looked worn, and beside him was a small backpack. A cardboard sign leaned against the bench. You have probably seen signs like that before. Need help. Anything helps. Most people walked past him without looking. Some looked down at their phones. Others walked faster. And honestly, I almost did the same. When you are new in a country, your mind is busy thinking about survival. Finding work. Paying rent. Understanding conversations. Trying not to make mistakes. Your brain becomes focused only on your own problems. But as I passed the bench, something unexpected happened. The man looked up. And he smiled. It was not the kind of smile that asks for pity. It was calm. Peaceful. Almost warm. The kind of smile you might see from someone who already understands something about life that others are still trying to figure out. For a moment, I slowed my steps. Our eyes met. And then he spoke. Good morning, friend. His voice was slow and warm. Easy to understand. That alone surprised me. Many conversations at that time felt too fast for my ears. But his words were clear. So I stopped for a moment and answered carefully. Good morning. My accent was strong. My sentence was short. But he didn't seem to mind. His smile became a little bigger. Then he said something simple. Cold day, huh? I nodded. Yes, very cold. He chuckled softly. And then he said something strange. You'll get used to it. Those 4 words confused me. Because we had never met before. How did he know I was new here? Maybe it was my accent. Maybe it was the way I looked at everything like a visitor reading a book written in a language he barely understood. Before I could ask anything else, my bus arrived. The doors opened with a loud mechanical sound. People stepped inside quickly to escape the cold. I climbed onto the bus and found a seat near the window. As the bus started moving, I looked back through the glass. The homeless man was still sitting on the bench. Still smiling. At that moment I didn't realize something important. That quiet stranger, the man everyone else ignored, would later teach me one of the most powerful lessons of my life. A lesson about gratitude. A lesson about patience. And strangely enough, a lesson about why I stayed in America. Sometimes the person who changes your life is not a teacher, not a boss, and not a famous expert. Sometimes it is simply the person sitting quietly on a cold bench, smiling at the world. The man on the bench. Some memories feel small at first, almost forgettable. But later, when life moves forward and the pieces finally connect, those tiny moments suddenly look much bigger. Like a quiet domino that started a chain reaction you didn't even notice at the time. That morning on the bus, I kept thinking about the man on the bench. Not because of his clothes. Not because of the sign next to him. But because of that calm smile. You see, when someone is struggling, especially someone without a home, you usually expect a certain expression. maybe sadness, maybe frustration, maybe exhaustion. But that man looked peaceful. And that confused me. The bus rolled slowly through the winter streets. Outside the window, people hurried along sidewalks with hot coffee in their hands. Cars stopped and started at red lights. The city was waking up. Inside my mind, however, a quiet question was repeating again and again. Why was he smiling? At that time, my own life didn't feel very stable either. Living in the United States as a newcomer was exciting, yes, but it was also complicated. There were forms to fill out, systems to understand, and rules that felt very different from what I had known before. Even simple daily tasks could feel like small missions. Opening a bank account. Talking to a landlord. Understanding workplace conversations. When English is not yet comfortable, every conversation becomes a small test. Your brain begins to prepare sentences long before speaking. Sometimes you practice the sentence silently in your head 2 or 3 times before saying it out loud. Psychologists call this language processing delay. When we use a second language, our brain often takes an extra 1 or 2 seconds to build a response. In normal conversation, those 2 seconds can feel like 10. The other person speaks. Your brain translates. You build your answer. And by the time you are ready, the conversation has already moved somewhere else. So people who are learning English often become quieter. Not because they have nothing to say, but because their thoughts are still traveling through translation. That was exactly my situation. At work I listened much more than I spoke. Some days I went through entire mornings speaking only a few sentences. Good morning. Yes, I understand. Thank you. Small phrases. Safe phrases. Short sentences that didn't give my brain too much pressure. But even in those quiet days, something interesting was happening inside my brain. Every word I heard was slowly building a map. Language learning researchers explain this as pattern recognition. The brain collects pieces of sound, rhythm, and structure. Over time, those pieces start forming predictable patterns. At first everything sounds like noise. Later, you start recognizing pieces. Then one day your brain suddenly understands full sentences without translating them. That transformation takes time. And patience. At that moment in my life, patience was not my strongest skill. So as the bus moved toward my workplace, I stared out the window thinking about the strange smile of a homeless man, and wondering why it felt more peaceful than my own thoughts. The workday passed slowly. Nothing dramatic happened. Emails. Small tasks. Quiet conversations. But something interesting happened in the afternoon. My brain replayed that short conversation again. Good morning, friend. Cold day, huh? You'll get used to it. 3 short sentences. Simple English. But they felt comfortable. Why? Because the man had spoken slowly. Clearly. Without complicated vocabulary. And that is actually one of the best ways to learn a language, comprehensible input. This idea was made famous by linguist Stephen Krashen. His research shows that people learn languages most effectively when they hear language that is slightly above their current level, but still understandable. Not too easy. Not too difficult. Just enough challenge for the brain to grow. That short conversation with the man on the bench had exactly that balance. I understood every word. And for once, my brain did not feel tired after listening. It felt calm. When work ended that evening, the winter sky was already turning dark. The cold air had returned, sharper than in the morning. As I walked back toward the bus stop, I didn't expect to see him again. But when I reached the corner, something familiar caught my eye. The same bench. The same backpack. And the same man. Still sitting there. Still calm. Still smiling. Streetlights were starting to glow above the sidewalk. People passed him again, just like before, some fast, some distracted, some pretending not to see him. But this time, something inside me hesitated. My steps slowed. The bus had not arrived yet. So for the first time that day, I did something different. Instead of walking past him, I stopped. Just for a moment. And the strange thing is, sometimes the smallest decision, pausing for 1 minute, saying one sentence, listening to one stranger, can quietly change the direction of your life. At that moment, I didn't know it yet. But the second conversation with that man would reveal something surprising about gratitude, about happiness, and about why some people who have almost nothing still seem richer than everyone else. And strangely enough, that lesson would later shape my life in America, my relationships, and even my future family. All because I decided to stop for a moment on a cold evening and talk to the man on the bench. A conversation no one expected. Standing next to a homeless stranger is a strange moment for many people. Not because of danger. Most of the time, it is simply because society quietly trains us to look away. You probably know this feeling. You see someone asking for help on the street, and your brain immediately begins a silent debate. Should I stop? Should I say something? Maybe someone else will help. Maybe I will feel uncomfortable. So most people keep walking. Not because they are bad people, but because the moment feels uncertain. That evening, I almost continued walking too. But something about the man's calm smile made the moment feel different. So I stopped beside the bench. The wind moved slowly between the buildings, carrying that sharp winter cold that seems to slip through every layer of clothing. Cars passed behind us, and the sound of traffic blended with distant voices. The man looked up again. And once more, he smiled like he had been expecting me. "Hey, friend," he said warmly. His voice was relaxed, like we had already spoken many times before. For a second, my brain began preparing English sentences again. When you are learning a language, your mind sometimes becomes like a translator machine working overtime. You listen. You translate. You build a response. But this time I remembered something important. The sentences did not need to be perfect. They only needed to be honest. So I spoke slowly. "Hello, again." He nodded, clearly understanding my accent. "You're the guy from this morning," he said. I laughed a little. "Yes." Then something surprising happened. He pointed gently toward the empty space on the bench. "Sit for a minute," he said. "Bus takes time anyway." For a moment I hesitated. In many cultures, sitting next to a stranger on a cold city bench might feel uncomfortable. But there was something peaceful about the moment. So I sat down. And suddenly, the situation felt almost ordinary. Just two people waiting for a bus. This is one of the most interesting things about human psychology. When people share the same physical space, sitting together, waiting together, experiencing the same weather, the brain begins to feel a subtle connection. Social scientists call this shared context bonding. In simple words, when two people share the same moment, even strangers can feel less like strangers. The man rubbed his hands together slowly to warm them. Cold winter this year, he said. Yes, I answered. He glanced at me again and asked something simple. Where you from? That question is very common in the United States. America is full of people from different countries, cultures, and backgrounds. Asking where someone comes from is often a friendly way to start understanding their story. I told him the name of my country. He nodded slowly. Long way from home. That sentence landed gently in the air between us. And suddenly I felt something strange. He understood my situation faster than many people I worked with. Maybe because life had already shown him many different kinds of struggle. He leaned back on the bench and looked toward the streetlights. You came here for work, he asked. Yes, I said. And English, I added carefully. He chuckled. Yeah, English will do that to you. We both laughed. And that small moment of laughter did something powerful. It relaxed my brain. Research about language learning shows something very interesting. When people laugh or feel relaxed during conversation, the brain releases endorphins, chemicals that reduce stress and help memory formation. In other words, when learning a language feels relaxed, the brain learns faster. That evening conversation became one of the easiest English conversations I had ever experienced. Not because my English was suddenly perfect, but because the pressure disappeared. The man noticed my careful pronunciation and said something encouraging. You speak clear. Just slow. That advice might sound simple, but it was exactly right. Many learners think they must speak fast to sound fluent. But in reality, clear and slow speech often sounds more confident. Even native speakers slow down when they want to be understood. The man then pointed gently to my coat. First winter here? I nodded. Yes. He smiled again. You'll get used to it. Those were the same words he had said in the morning. But this time I felt curious. You said that before, I told him. He laughed softly. Well, it's true. Then he added something unexpected. Cold weather teaches patience. I tilted my head slightly. Why? He looked at the sky for a moment before answering. Because winter reminds you something important, he said. What? I asked. That hard seasons always pass. His voice was calm, but the meaning felt deeper than a simple sentence. At that moment I suddenly wondered something. This man had almost nothing. No house. No warm office. No stable routine. Yet his words carried a quiet wisdom that many comfortable people never talk about. I looked at the cardboard sign next to the bench. Is this your spot every day? I asked carefully. He nodded. Most days. Then he turned back toward me and asked a question I didn't expect. You happy here? The question surprised me. Because the honest answer was complicated. America had opportunities. But life was still difficult. Learning English. Working hard. Missing family far away. Trying to build a new future step by step. So I answered slowly. I think. I am still learning. He nodded like that answer made perfect sense. Then he said something that would stay in my memory for many years. Good, he said. Because learning is the only thing nobody can take from you. At that moment my bus finally appeared at the corner. Its headlights cut through the cold evening air. The doors opened. People began stepping inside. I stood up from the bench. "Thank you," I said, "for the conversation." He waved casually. "See you around, friend." As the bus drove away, I looked through the window again. The man was still sitting on the bench. Still calm. Still smiling. And strangely, that short conversation made me realize something important. Sometimes the best English lessons don't happen in classrooms. Sometimes they happen on cold benches, with strangers who have nothing to teach except life itself. But I still didn't know the most surprising part of the story. Because the next time I saw him, he would tell me a secret about gratitude that completely changed the way I looked at my life in America. The secret behind his smile. Some people carry wisdom in books. Some carry it through years of education. And sometimes, the most surprising wisdom comes from someone sitting quietly on a cold city bench with nothing but a backpack and a cardboard sign. A few days passed after our second conversation. Life returned to its usual rhythm. Work in the morning. Bus rides. Short conversations with coworkers. Slow progress with English. Some days felt productive. Other days felt frustrating. Learning a language in a new country is a strange emotional roller coaster. One day you understand an entire conversation and feel proud. The next day someone asks you a simple question and your brain suddenly forgets every word you know. Psychologists actually explain this phenomenon as language fluctuation. The brain learns new systems in waves, not in straight lines. Some days feel like progress. Other days feel like confusion. But even on confusing days, the brain is still learning quietly. That week, winter continued spreading across the city. The air grew colder, and the sidewalks often looked silver in the early mornings. One evening after work, I stepped off the bus and saw a familiar shape near the bench. The same man. The same backpack. The same peaceful posture. And once again, that same calm smile. I walked toward him almost automatically. "Hello," I said. He looked up and nodded. "Well, look who survived another day," he joked. I laughed. Yes, still alive. He patted the bench again like before. "Sit for a minute." So I sat down. For a moment we both watched the street. Cars moved slowly through the cold air, their headlights glowing like soft yellow stars. Then he asked something simple. "How's English going?" I thought about the honest answer. "Slow," I admitted. He smiled. "Slow is good." That answer surprised me. Most people talk about learning as something that must be fast. Fast progress. Fast improvement. Fast success. But he seemed completely comfortable with the idea of slow progress. "Why slow good?" I asked. He leaned forward slightly and rested his elbows on his knees. Because slow learning usually stays longer, he said. Then he tapped his head gently. Fast learning sometimes disappears fast too. His sentence was simple, but the idea behind it matched something scientists often say about learning. When the brain processes information slowly and repeatedly, it strengthens neural connections. These connections form long-term memory. In other words, slow learning can actually become stronger learning. I nodded thoughtfully. Then curiosity finally pushed me to ask the question that had been growing in my mind for days. "Can I ask something?" I said. "Sure," he replied. I hesitated for a moment. Then I asked it. "Why are you always smiling?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked across the street where people walked quickly with shopping bags and warm coats. Finally, he said something unexpected. "Because I used to complain all the time." That answer caught me off guard. "Really?" I asked. "Oh yeah," he said with a quiet laugh. He stretched his arms slowly and leaned back against the bench. "Years ago I had a job, a small apartment, a car, normal life." His voice wasn't sad when he said it. Just calm. Then some bad decisions, some bad luck, and things changed. He didn't go into details, and I didn't push. But his eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen difficult chapters. Then he said something that made the cold evening feel strangely quiet. "One day I lost almost everything." He paused for a moment. "But that's when something interesting happened." I waited. He looked at his hands and continued. "When you lose most things, you start noticing the few things you still have." The sentence hung in the air like a quiet bell. He continued speaking slowly. "I still had food sometimes. Still had air to breathe. Still had the sky. Still had the sun." Then he looked at me again. "And sometimes, I still had a conversation with a stranger." That made me smile. He pointed toward the busy street. "Most people over there have 100 good things in their lives," he said. "House, job, family, food." Then he shrugged slightly. "But their brains only look at the two things they don't have." His observation reminded me of something psychologists call negativity bias. The human brain naturally pays more attention to problems than to blessings. This survival instinct helped humans notice danger thousands of years ago. But in modern life, it often causes unnecessary stress. The man tapped the bench beside him again. "I learned something sitting here every day," he said. "What?" I asked. He smiled again. "Gratitude is like a muscle." That sentence surprised me. "A muscle?" I repeated. "Yeah," he said. If you don't use it, it gets weak. He pointed toward his chest. But if you practice noticing small good things, it gets stronger. Then he laughed quietly. Pretty soon you find yourself smiling at cold mornings. I looked at him carefully. And suddenly his smile made sense. It wasn't the smile of someone ignoring reality. It was the smile of someone who had trained his mind to see life differently. At that moment something shifted quietly inside my own thoughts. I had been focusing on my struggles. Difficult English. Long work hours. Missing family. But I had not been noticing something else. I had opportunities. A chance to learn. A chance to grow. A chance to build a future. Sometimes gratitude doesn't arrive in big dramatic moments. Sometimes it arrives quietly, on a winter bench, through a conversation with someone the world barely notices. But that night, the homeless man said something even more surprising. Something about love. Something about family. Something that would later change the direction of my life in America forever. And strangely enough, that lesson would begin with a very simple English phrase. 3 words. I am grateful. 3 words that changed my mind. Strange things happen when a simple sentence enters your mind at the right moment. Sometimes it feels like a tiny key quietly unlocking a door you didn't even know existed. That night, the man on the bench leaned forward and said something very simple. Try saying 3 words every morning, he told me. I looked at him with curiosity. What words? I asked. He smiled again. I am grateful. Just 3 words. But he said them slowly, like each word had weight. I am grateful. The strange thing about language is that words do more than communicate ideas. They also shape the way our brain experiences reality. Psychologists have studied this for many years. The brain does not only react to events, it also reacts to the words we repeat to ourselves. If someone repeats negative thoughts every day, I'm tired, this is impossible, I can't do this, the brain slowly begins to believe those messages. But when someone practices positive framing, even in small ways, the brain begins to notice opportunities instead of obstacles. The man on the bench seemed to understand this idea without ever using complicated psychological terms. Gratitude changes what your brain looks for, he said. Then he pointed across the street again. Most people wake up and say things like, I have too much work. He paused and shrugged. But imagine starting the day with something different. He spoke slowly again. I am grateful for today. I am grateful I woke up. I am grateful I can learn. His words felt simple, but something about them made sense. At that time in my life, most of my mornings began with stress. Alarm clock. Cold weather. Work responsibilities. English conversations I wasn't fully confident about. My brain was constantly focusing on what felt difficult. But what if the brain could be trained to look somewhere else? There is actually a fascinating study from positive psychology that supports this idea. Researchers found that people who practice daily gratitude, simply writing or saying 3 things they appreciated each day, experienced measurable improvements in mood, motivation, and even sleep quality. Why? Because gratitude shifts the brain's attention system. Instead of scanning the world for threats and problems, the brain begins scanning for positive signals. The man rubbed his hands together again to warm them. "Try it for 1 week," he said. "Just 1 week." I laughed softly. "Just saying words?" He nodded. "Yep." Then he added something funny. "Your brain is like a dog." That comparison made me smile. "What do you mean?" I asked. "If you always point the dog toward problems," he said, "it learns to find problems." Then he tapped his temple again. "But if you point it toward good things, it starts finding those too." The image was surprisingly clear. Our attention is like a flashlight in a dark room. Wherever we aim it, that part of the room becomes visible. Most people shine their flashlight directly at stress. The homeless man had learned to aim his somewhere else. I sat quietly for a moment thinking about it. Then I asked him something personal. "Do you say it every day?" He nodded. "Every morning." "Even when it's cold?" He laughed loudly. "Especially when it's cold." That made both of us laugh again. At that moment I noticed something interesting about my own English. The conversation felt easy. No pressure. No fear of mistakes. Just simple sentences moving naturally between 2 people. That is one of the best environments for language learning. Relaxed conversation. When the brain feels safe and calm, the learning center of the brain, the hippocampus, works more efficiently. Stress blocks learning. Relaxation supports learning. And that small conversation on the bench had become one of the most comfortable English conversations of my week. Eventually my bus appeared again at the corner. The bright headlights approached slowly. I stood up. "Thank you," I said, "for the advice." He waved casually. "See you tomorrow, maybe?" I nodded and stepped onto the bus. But something interesting happened the next morning. My alarm rang. The winter air still felt cold. Work still waited. English was still challenging. But before getting out of bed, I remembered the man's advice. So quietly, almost experimentally, I said the 3 words. "I am grateful." At first it felt strange. Almost silly. But I said them again. I am grateful I can learn. Then another thought appeared. I am grateful I have this opportunity. something subtle shifted in my mind. The day didn't suddenly become perfect, but the weight of stress felt slightly lighter. The brain had begun looking at the same life from a different angle. And strangely, that small daily habit would soon lead to another unexpected moment. A moment involving a woman, a conversation, and a connection that would slowly grow into something much bigger than I ever expected. Because sometimes the smallest mindset change quietly opens the door to the next chapter of your life. And that chapter would begin with a simple English conversation that almost didn't happen. The coffee shop conversation. Cold mornings in America have a quiet personality. Streets wake up slowly. Coffee shops glow like warm lanterns in the winter air. And sometimes, without warning, the next chapter of your life quietly begins in a place that smells like roasted coffee beans. About a week after my conversation with the man on the bench, my morning routine had changed slightly. The 3 words had become a habit. I am grateful. Every morning before leaving my small apartment, I said those words quietly. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough for my own brain to hear them. And something interesting started happening. My mood didn't magically become perfect, but the world felt less heavy. The small things in daily life began to stand out more. The warmth of sunlight through the bus window. The sound of people chatting in English around me. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, I was slowly finding my place in this country. One morning, after getting off the bus near my office, the cold wind was stronger than usual. My hands were freezing. So I stepped into a small coffee shop on the corner. The place was simple but cozy. Warm yellow lights. Soft music playing in the background. A few people typing on laptops. Someone quietly reading a book. And behind the counter stood a woman making coffee. She looked up and smiled politely. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was calm and friendly. For a moment my brain hesitated. English conversations in public still made me slightly nervous. But something about the relaxed atmosphere helped. "Good morning," I replied. My pronunciation felt careful, like stepping on thin ice. She waited patiently. "What can I get for you?" she asked. I glanced at the menu board. Coffee names in America can be confusing for newcomers. Latte, cappuccino, Americano, mocha. My brain quickly tried to translate everything at once. Finally, I chose the safest option. "A small coffee, please." She nodded and began preparing the drink. While waiting, I noticed something interesting about the environment around me. People were casually speaking English everywhere. A group near the window laughed while telling a story. A man next to me ordered breakfast without hesitation. Another woman asked the barista about a pastry. No one seemed worried about making mistakes. No one seemed stressed about pronunciation. And suddenly, I realized something important. Most real-life English conversations are actually very simple. Short sentences. Clear words. Friendly tone. Language learning research supports this idea. According to studies in second language acquisition, learners improve faster when they engage in real-life communication, even with limited vocabulary. The brain learns patterns through exposure. Not through perfection. Not through memorizing thousands of rules. Just through repetition in natural situations. The coffee shop felt like a small training ground for English. My name was called. Coffee for Daniel? I raised my hand. That's me. The woman handed me the cup. Here you go. Then she noticed something. You're not from here, right? Her tone wasn't judgmental. Just curious. I smiled slightly. No. I moved here recently. She leaned on the counter a little. Where from? I told her. Her eyes brightened. Oh wow. That's far. Then she asked another question. How long have you been in the U.S.? About 8 months. She nodded slowly. That's brave. Her response surprised me. Brave? I had never thought about it that way. To me, the move felt messy and uncertain. But from her perspective, it looked courageous. It reminded me of another psychological principle called perspective shift. Sometimes the story we tell ourselves is very different from the story others see. Inside our minds, we focus on fear and difficulty. But from the outside, people often see effort and determination. She wiped the counter casually. So, how are you liking it here so far? I thought for a moment. The honest answer came out slowly. It's challenging. Then I added something else. But I'm learning. She smiled. That's the best attitude. Her name tag read Emily. Learning is basically life, she said. Then she added something funny. My grandmother says the brain is like Wi-Fi. I laughed. Wi-Fi. She nodded. If you stop connecting, it gets weak. The comparison made sense. Language learning really is like that. The brain strengthens connections the more often we use them. Every conversation becomes a small signal boosting the network. We talked for another minute about work and the weather. Nothing dramatic. Just normal conversation. But something inside me felt different as I left the coffee shop. For the first time since arriving in the United States, English didn't feel like a wall. It felt more like a bridge. And strangely enough, that small conversation with Emily would soon become part of a much bigger story. Because some relationships don't begin with fireworks. They begin with something quieter. A cup of coffee. A simple question. And two people slowly learning each other's language. Meanwhile, across the street, the man on the bench was there again. And when he saw me holding the coffee cup, he gave the same warm smile. As if he somehow already knew that something in my life had just begun to change. The bridge of small conversations. Real relationships rarely begin with dramatic movie moments. Most of the time, they grow quietly through repeated, ordinary conversations that slowly build trust, comfort, and familiarity. The next morning, I returned to the same coffee shop. Not because I planned something important. Honestly, my hands were just cold again. But when I opened the door, the warm air wrapped around me like a blanket, and I saw Emily behind the counter again. She noticed me immediately. "Good morning," she said. Her smile was easy and natural, like she had already placed me somewhere in her memory. "Good morning," I replied. My voice felt a little more relaxed than yesterday. That small difference matters more than people realize. Confidence in language learning grows in tiny steps, not giant leaps. The brain loves familiar environments. Neuroscience research shows that when a learner returns to the same place, sees the same faces, and repeats similar conversations, the brain begins to reduce anxiety signals. The amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for fear, starts to calm down. When fear goes down, learning goes up. That morning, ordering coffee felt easier. "A small coffee again?" Emily asked. I smiled. "Yes. The same one." She laughed softly. "Good choice." While she prepared the drink, she asked another simple question. "So, how's your week going?" I paused for a second. Simple question. Simple answer. "It's busy," I said. "But good." She nodded like she understood. Busy is the American lifestyle. That made me laugh. She handed me the coffee cup. Then she asked something that surprised me. "Do you practice English every day?" The question caught me off guard. "A little," I said. She leaned on the counter. "Well, you're doing great." That sentence might sound small. But encouragement in a second language can feel powerful. Language learners often underestimate how important positive feedback is. Studies in educational psychology show that learners who receive encouragement from native speakers experience stronger motivation and persistence. In other words, one kind comment can keep someone learning for weeks. I took a sip of coffee. Then I asked her a question. "Do you work here every day?" "Most days," she said. Then she pointed toward a window table. "Sometimes I sit there during my break." Her tone was casual, but something about that moment felt like an invitation. Not a formal one. Just a small door opening. That week, I began stopping by the coffee shop more often. Some mornings we talked for 30 seconds. Other mornings, maybe 2 minutes. The conversations stayed simple. Weather. Work. Funny customer stories. American food. My experiences adjusting to life in the United States. But something interesting was happening beneath the surface. Every conversation was strengthening two things at the same time. My English. And our connection. Language learning experts often talk about something called comprehensible input. It means hearing language that is slightly above your current level, but still understandable. That is exactly what these conversations became. Emily spoke naturally, but not too fast. When I didn't understand a word, she sometimes explained it with simpler words. Without realizing it, she had become part of my learning process. One afternoon, when the coffee shop was quieter, she asked a deeper question. What was the hardest thing about moving here? I thought for a moment. Then I answered honestly. Loneliness. She nodded slowly. Yeah. That's real. The word real sounded simple, but it carried empathy. She didn't try to give advice. She just acknowledged the feeling. That is another interesting part of American culture. Sometimes people don't try to fix problems immediately. They simply listen. And being heard can be more powerful than solutions. I told her about arriving in a new country. About learning new systems. About navigating a language that still felt unfamiliar. Then I mentioned something else. The funny thing is, the first person who gave me advice here was a homeless man. Her eyebrows lifted. Really? I smiled. Yeah. And I told her the story about the man on the bench. About the 3 words. I am grateful. Emily listened carefully. When I finished, she looked thoughtful. That's actually beautiful, she said. Then she said something that stayed with me. Sometimes wisdom shows up in unexpected places. Outside the window, the city moved quickly. Cars. People rushing to work. Busy sidewalks. But inside that small coffee shop, time felt slower. Calmer. And gradually, something was growing between us. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just quietly, like a bridge being built one plank at a time. At that moment, I didn't know where that bridge would lead. But I had a feeling it would lead somewhere important. Because sometimes the most important relationships in life begin with something incredibly simple. A smile. A cup of coffee. And the courage to keep speaking, even when your English isn't perfect. Meanwhile, across the street, the man on the bench watched the city again. And when our eyes met briefly through the window, he smiled. almost like he already knew that the next chapter of this story was beginning. The day the bench was empty. One morning, something felt different before I even noticed it. Sometimes the brain senses change before the eyes confirm it. The street looked the same. The buses moved the same way. The coffee shop lights glowed warmly in the cold morning air. But when I looked toward the familiar bench across the street, it was empty. For a moment, I slowed my steps. That bench had quietly become part of my routine. Not in a dramatic way, just like a background character in a story you slowly grow used to seeing. Every morning for weeks, the same man sat there. The homeless man with the warm smile. The man who told me 3 simple words. I am grateful. But today, the bench was empty. At first I thought maybe he arrived later. Maybe he was somewhere nearby. Still, something about the empty space felt strange. It's interesting how human connection works. People can enter our lives for only a short time, yet still leave a meaningful mark. Psychologists sometimes call this a micro-relationship. A connection that is brief, but emotionally meaningful. These small interactions, like a friendly barista, a kind stranger, or a wise person you meet once, can quietly shape the direction of our lives. I stood there for a few seconds, looking at the bench. Then the cold wind pushed me toward the coffee shop. When I stepped inside, Emily looked up. "Good morning," she said. But she noticed something immediately. "You look distracted." I laughed softly. "Maybe a little." She handed me the usual cup of coffee. "What's going on?" I glanced back through the window. "The man who sits on the bench, he's not there today." Emily looked outside. "Oh, the older guy? You know him?" I asked. She nodded. "I've seen him around for years." Then she added something surprising. "My dad used to talk with him sometimes." That made me curious. "Really?" "Yeah," she said. "He said the guy used to have a normal life." That sentence hung in the air for a moment. A normal life. It reminded me of something people often forget about homelessness. Every person has a story before the moment we meet them. A past. A family. Dreams that once felt possible. Emily wiped the counter slowly. "My dad told me he used to work in construction," she said. Then something happened. I don't know all the details. She shrugged. Life can change quickly. Her words were calm, but the message was powerful. In America, and honestly everywhere in the world, many people live one unexpected event away from a very different life. Job loss. Health problems. Family crises. The stability people feel today can sometimes disappear tomorrow. That reality can feel scary. But it can also create something else. perspective, gratitude. And suddenly the three words from the bench echoed in my mind again. I am grateful. The man who had the least material comfort was the one teaching the deepest lesson about appreciation. Emily leaned slightly closer. You talked to him before? Yeah, I said. He gave me advice. She smiled with curiosity. Advice? I nodded. 3 words. She waited. I am grateful. Emily's expression softened. That sounds like him. You've talked to him too? I asked. A couple of times, she said. He's always kind. Then she added something interesting. My dad once said something about him. What? She thought for a second. He said some people lose everything, but still keep their humanity. That sentence stayed in the air like a quiet echo. Still keep their humanity. Outside the window, people hurried to work. Phones in their hands. Coffee cups in their arms. Schedules filling their minds. Yet somewhere in the middle of that busy world, a man without a home had quietly changed how I saw my own life. And something else had changed too. Before meeting him, my focus was always on what I lacked. Better English. More stability. More confidence. More certainty about the future. But slowly, my brain began noticing what I already had. Opportunity. Safety. A chance to learn. A chance to build relationships. And maybe even a chance to fall in love someday. Emily broke the silence with a small smile. You know, she said, gratitude is kind of contagious. I raised an eyebrow. Contagious? Yeah, she said. When someone shows appreciation for life, it makes other people notice good things too. She pointed toward my coffee. Like that. I looked at the cup. Steam rising slowly into the warm air. A simple thing. But in that moment, it felt meaningful. Because the truth is, life rarely changes through giant dramatic events. More often, it changes through small lessons. Small conversations. Small smiles from unexpected people. I looked at the empty bench again through the window. And quietly, in my mind, I repeated the 3 words once more. I am grateful. Because even if that man never appeared on the bench again, the lesson he gave me was already permanent. And strangely enough, that lesson was about to influence something even bigger. My relationship with Emily. A relationship that would soon grow far beyond simple coffee shop conversations. Because sometimes the people who guide our lives never stay long. They simply point us in the right direction and disappear. When friendship became something more. Sometimes the heart notices a change before the mind understands it. The coffee shop still looked the same. Same warm lights. Same smell of roasted beans. Same quiet music playing in the background. But something between Emily and me had slowly shifted. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just little changes that quietly added up over time. Our conversations were longer now. Instead of 30 seconds, we sometimes talked for 5 minutes. Sometimes 10. And the topics were slowly becoming more personal. One afternoon, when the shop was unusually quiet, Emily sat at the small table near the window during her break. She waved at me. "Hey, you can sit if you want." I hesitated for a second. In many cultures, people worry about interrupting someone's private time. But American culture often feels more casual. So I walked over and sat down. Outside the window, snow was beginning to fall lightly. Emily wrapped her hands around a warm cup of tea. "So," she said, smiling, "tell me something about your life before you moved here." The question opened a door. And for the first time, I told her more about my past. About my family. About growing up far away. About the dreams that eventually pushed me to move to the United States. She listened carefully. Not interrupting. Just nodding sometimes. Listening is a powerful social skill. Psychologists often say that people feel closest to those who truly listen to them. Because listening tells the brain something important. You matter. After I finished talking, she shared some of her own story. She had grown up in the same city. Her parents still lived nearby. Her childhood was simple. School. Friends. Part-time jobs. Then working at the coffee shop while finishing college. "My life probably sounds boring compared to yours," she said jokingly. I shook my head. "No. It sounds peaceful." She smiled softly. "Peaceful is good." Then she asked another question. "What made you stay here?" That question made me pause. At first, the answer had always been simple. Opportunity. Work. A better future. But now something else had quietly entered the picture. I looked around the coffee shop. Then I said honestly, "I think the people." Emily tilted her head slightly. "The people?" I nodded. "People like you." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Sometimes silence carries meaning. The human brain is very sensitive to emotional signals during quiet moments. A glance. A smile. The small shift in someone's posture. Emily looked down at her tea and laughed softly. "Well," she said, "that might be the nicest compliment I've heard all week." We both laughed. But something real had just happened. And both of us knew it. Friendship had quietly crossed the invisible line into something deeper. Psychologists sometimes call this moment the transition point. It's the moment when two people stop being just acquaintances and begin forming emotional attachment. It rarely happens through grand gestures. Instead, it happens through vulnerability, honesty, and shared experiences. Outside, the snowflakes were falling more heavily now. Emily looked out the window. "You know what's funny?" she said. "What?" "You've been in this country less than a year, and somehow you already understand something many people forget." "What's that?" I asked. "That life isn't really about rushing everywhere." She gestured around the quiet coffee shop. "Moments like this, talking, laughing, sharing stories, that's actually the good part." Her words reminded me again of the man on the bench. The homeless man who had nothing, yet seemed to understand life more deeply than many successful people rushing past him. Gratitude, connection, presence. Those ideas were slowly becoming the foundation of my new life in America. Emily finished her tea and stood up. "Back to work," she said. But before walking away, she paused. "Hey." "Yeah? Would you maybe want to grab dinner sometime?" "Not here. Somewhere normal." Her tone was casual, but her eyes carried a quiet question. For a second my brain froze. English vocabulary suddenly disappeared again. That happens sometimes when emotions appear. But finally I managed to answer. "Yes. I'd like that." She smiled. "Good." Then she walked back behind the counter, pretending to focus on work again. But I could see the small smile still on her face. And in that moment, something became clear. The journey that began with loneliness. The lesson that started with a homeless man's smile. Was slowly leading somewhere unexpected. Toward love. Toward family. Toward a life I had never imagined when I first stepped off the plane in the United States. But the most surprising part of the story was still waiting. Because the next time I saw the bench across the street, the man who changed everything would appear again. And this time, I would have something important to tell him. The man on the bench again. Winter in the United States has a strange way of slowing life down. Snow covers the noise of the city like a soft blanket. Cars move slower. People walk faster, shoulders slightly raised against the cold wind. Coffee shops become warmer, brighter, and somehow more important than usual. That morning, the sky was pale gray, and thin snowflakes floated quietly through the air. I stepped outside the coffee shop after finishing my drink. Emily had just returned to work behind the counter, but before I left she had smiled and said, "Don't forget. Friday dinner." That small sentence stayed in my mind as I crossed the street. Friday dinner. A simple plan. But to me, it felt like the beginning of something new. Life often changes quietly, not with fireworks but with small invitations. As I walked toward the bus stop, something familiar caught my eye. The bench. The same wooden bench across the street where I had once seen the homeless man. Months had passed since that first morning when he smiled at me and said those simple words. "Good morning. Beautiful day, right?" At the time, I had been confused. A man with almost nothing, sitting outside in the cold, calling the day beautiful. But now I understood that moment differently. Gratitude changes the way the brain sees the world. Psychologists explain that when people practice gratitude regularly, the brain slowly rewires its attention system. Instead of constantly scanning for problems, it begins noticing small positive moments. Warm coffee. A friendly smile. Snow falling quietly outside a window. And now, standing near the same bench again, I suddenly saw him. The same man. The same old coat. The same calm face. He was sitting exactly where he had been months earlier. For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me wondered if he would even remember me. But another part of me knew something important. Some encounters in life feel unfinished until you return. So I walked toward the bench. He noticed me approaching and looked up. And then, just like before, he smiled. A calm, simple smile. "Morning," he said. His voice sounded exactly the same. Warm. Relaxed. Friendly. "Good morning," I replied. This time, the words came easily. My English was still not perfect. But it was no longer trapped inside my head. Language learning experts often explain that confidence grows through repetition and emotional connection. When the brain links language with real human moments instead of just textbooks, speaking becomes easier. Standing there beside the bench, I felt that truth clearly. The man looked at me for a moment. Then he said something that surprised me. "You're the guy from a few months ago." I laughed softly. "You remember?" He nodded. "Sure. You looked like someone carrying the whole world on your shoulders." His description was painfully accurate. At that time, my mind had been full of stress. New country. New language. Loneliness. Fear of failure. But things were different now. I sat down beside him on the bench. Snowflakes landed quietly on the wooden seat. "I wanted to thank you," I said. He raised his eyebrows slightly. "For what?" "For that morning," I explained. "When you told me it was a beautiful day." He chuckled. "Well, it usually is." The simplicity of his answer made me smile. Many people assume wisdom must sound complicated. But often the deepest ideas are the simplest ones. I told him about the changes in my life. About practicing English every day. about slowly feeling less afraid to speak, about the coffee shop, and about Emily. He listened quietly, occasionally nodding. Listening again. The same powerful human skill Emily had shown me weeks earlier. When I finished, he looked out at the snowy street for a moment. Then he said something thoughtful. You know what most people get wrong about happiness? I shook my head. They think it comes after everything in life is perfect. He tapped the bench lightly. But happiness actually comes first. I frowned slightly, thinking about his words. He continued. If you wait until everything is perfect before feeling grateful, you might wait forever. Snow continued falling slowly around us. Cars passed. People hurried down the sidewalk. But for a few minutes, the world felt very quiet. I realized something in that moment. This man, sitting on a cold bench with almost nothing, had given me 2 lessons that changed my life. The first lesson was simple gratitude. The second lesson was perspective. Sometimes the people with the least comfort still understand life the most clearly. Before leaving, I reached into my pocket and handed him a warm coffee from the shop. His eyes widened slightly. Well, now this really is a beautiful morning, he joked. We both laughed. Then I stood up. Before walking away, I turned back. Hey, I said. I have dinner with someone special on Friday. He smiled knowingly. Sounds like your life is moving in the right direction. Maybe it was. But the most surprising part of the story was still waiting. Because Friday night would not only change my relationship with Emily, it would also lead to a decision that would shape the rest of my life in America. And strangely enough, the lesson from the homeless man would guide that decision too. Sometimes the smallest moments echo far into the future. And sometimes, a simple smile from a stranger becomes the first step toward an entirely new life. The dinner that changed everything. Friday evening arrived quietly, but inside my mind it felt like a major event. The sky above the city was dark blue, and the winter air carried that familiar American smell of cold streets and warm restaurants. Yellow lights glowed from windows along the sidewalk, and people walked quickly, hands in their coat pockets. I checked my phone again. 6:42 p.m. Dinner with Emily was at 7. A small moment like this might seem ordinary, but when you are living far away from home in a new country, moments like this carry deeper meaning. They represent connection, belonging, the possibility that your life is slowly building roots. Language learners often experience something interesting during emotional situations. Even if they have practiced English for months, their brain suddenly feels slow again when they are nervous. Psychologists explain that anxiety temporarily reduces working memory. That means your brain struggles to access vocabulary you already know. And that was exactly what I felt walking toward the small restaurant where we planned to meet. My English felt like a messy drawer. All the words were somewhere inside, but not always easy to find. The restaurant Emily chose was small and cozy. Warm yellow lights hung from the ceiling, and the smell of grilled food filled the room. Soft music played in the background. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting at a small table near the window. She waved when she saw me. "Hey! Over here." Her smile immediately relaxed my mind. Scientists often say that when we see a friendly face, our brain releases oxytocin, sometimes called the connection hormone. It reduces stress and increases trust. I sat down. "You found the place okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "The city is starting to feel less confusing." She laughed softly. "That means you're officially adjusting to American life." We ordered food and began talking. At first, the conversation stayed light. Work at the coffee shop. Funny customers. Strange American habits. But slowly, the conversation became deeper. Emily asked thoughtful questions. "Do you miss home?" "Yes," I admitted. "Every day." She nodded slowly. "That makes sense." Many immigrants experience this emotional balance. Part of the heart lives in the past. Another part slowly builds a future somewhere new. Emily told me something personal too. "When I was younger, I always thought I would move to another country someday," she said. "Really?" I asked. "Yeah. I wanted adventure." She smiled slightly. But life doesn't always go exactly how we imagine. I understood that feeling. Life rarely follows a perfect plan. But sometimes the unexpected path becomes the most meaningful one. Our food arrived. For a few minutes, we simply enjoyed the meal. Then Emily leaned forward slightly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What made you stay in this city?" The question felt familiar. The homeless man had asked something similar. And the answer was still forming in my heart. At first, I said slowly, "I stayed because I had no other plan." She listened carefully. "But now, I think I stay because this place started to feel like a story I want to continue." She tilted her head. "A story?" "Yes." I looked around the restaurant. This city gave me difficult days. But it also gave me small moments that changed me. The coffee shop. Learning English. Meeting you. Her eyes softened. Silence filled the space between us again. But it was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence where two people understand something without needing many words. Then she said something simple. "I'm really glad you came to that coffee shop." I smiled. So am I. Dinner lasted almost 2 hours. Time moved strangely fast. At the end of the evening, we stepped outside into the cold night air. Snow from earlier in the week still covered the sidewalks. The city felt quiet. Emily walked beside me slowly. Then she stopped. "You know," she said, "you've changed a lot since the first time you came into the coffee shop." "How?" "You used to look like someone who was trying to survive." She smiled warmly. "Now you look like someone who is starting to live." Her words stayed in my mind. Because she was right. Something inside me had changed. The lesson from the homeless man. The practice of speaking English every day. The simple courage to talk to strangers. All those small actions had slowly built a new version of me. Before we said goodbye, Emily looked at me again. "So, would you like to do this again sometime?" I laughed. "Yes. Definitely." She smiled. "Good." Then she walked toward her car. As I walked home that night, the city lights reflected on the snowy streets. And suddenly, I realized something important. The life I once feared might fail was quietly turning into the life I had once dreamed about. But the most beautiful part of the story had not happened yet. Because the next chapter would include something even more meaningful than love. It would include family. And the lesson that started with a homeless man's smile would finally reveal its full meaning. The real meaning of that smile. Spring arrived slowly in the city. Snow disappeared from the sidewalks. The trees that had looked empty all winter began showing small green leaves again. People walked outside longer, talking, laughing, enjoying the warmer air. Life felt lighter. And my life had changed more in those months than I could have imagined when I first arrived in the United States. Emily and I continued seeing each other after that first dinner. At first it was simple. Coffee after work. Walking through the park. Talking about everything from childhood memories to strange cultural differences between our lives. But slowly, something deeper grew. Psychologists often describe love not as a sudden explosion, but as a gradual construction. Two people build emotional safety through hundreds of small moments, shared laughter, honest conversations, quiet understanding. That was exactly how our relationship grew. Nothing dramatic. Just real. One afternoon, many months later, we were walking through the same street where the coffee shop stood. Emily stopped suddenly. "Wait," she said. "What?" I asked. She pointed across the street. The bench. The same wooden bench that had quietly shaped my journey in this country. But the man who used to sit there was gone. For a moment I felt strangely sad. Some people appear in our lives for only a short time, yet their influence stays for years. Emily noticed my expression. You're thinking about that man again, aren't you? I nodded. I had told her about him many times. About the first morning when he smiled and called it a beautiful day. About the conversation months later when he told me something that changed my perspective on happiness. Emily smiled softly. You know, she said, sometimes people enter our lives just long enough to teach us something important. Her words were simple. But they were true. The lesson from that homeless man had quietly shaped many choices I made afterward. Gratitude. Presence. Appreciating small moments instead of waiting for a perfect future. And those ideas had slowly built the life I was living now. A life that included friendship, confidence, and love. About a year later, Emily and I made another important decision. We got married. The wedding was small. Nothing extravagant. Just a few close friends, some family members, and a simple ceremony in a small park. The sky was bright blue that day. When I looked at Emily standing beside me, I felt something powerful. Not the dramatic excitement shown in movies, but something deeper. A calm certainty that life had guided me exactly where I needed to be. Language had once been my biggest fear in this country. I was afraid of speaking. Afraid of making mistakes. Afraid of sounding different. But those fears slowly disappeared because of real conversations. Real people. Real moments. That is why learning English through stories can be so powerful. When language is connected to emotion, memory, and real life, the brain remembers it more easily. Instead of memorizing isolated vocabulary, you remember experiences. You remember feelings. You remember moments like this story. Years later, our life grew even fuller. Emily and I welcomed our first child. Holding my son for the first time, I suddenly understood something new about the journey that brought me here. Life rarely follows the path we imagine. When I first arrived in America, my biggest goal was simply survival. Find work. Learn English. Avoid failure. But life had slowly offered something much more meaningful. A home. A family. A sense of belonging. Sometimes I still walk past the coffee shop where everything began. The shop is still there. The bench across the street is still there too. And sometimes when I see someone sitting there, I remember the man who changed my life with a simple smile. His lesson was not complicated. Gratitude does not come after happiness. Gratitude creates happiness. If you wait until everything in life becomes perfect before feeling thankful, you might wait forever. But if you learn to appreciate small moments today, a warm cup of coffee, a conversation with a stranger, a smile from someone sitting on a bench, then life begins to feel meaningful much sooner. And maybe that is the real lesson hidden inside this story. Sometimes the people who appear to have the least still understand life the most. And sometimes a simple smile from a homeless person becomes the first step toward an entirely new life. That small moment changed the way I saw the world. It helped me keep moving forward when learning English felt difficult. It helped me open my heart to new people. And it quietly led me to the family I have today. So the next time life feels heavy or uncertain, remember something simple. Your story might be changing in ways you cannot see yet. Sometimes the smallest moment becomes the beginning of everything. Before this story ends, let me leave you with one simple thought. Sometimes the moment that changes your life is not loud, dramatic, or perfect. Sometimes it is just a quiet smile from someone the world has forgotten. That homeless man probably never knew what his small kindness did to my life. But his smile changed the way I saw the world. It helped me keep learning English when I felt embarrassed to speak. It helped me believe that even strangers can become part of your story. And maybe that is the real lesson. You don't need perfect grammar to connect with people. You don't need perfect confidence to start speaking English. You only need one small step, one conversation, one moment of courage. So if you are learning English right now and sometimes feel tired, shy, or ready to quit, remember this. Your story might be just beginning. And somewhere in your journey, a small moment, maybe a smile, maybe a conversation, may change everything. If you enjoyed this real English story practice, and you want to improve your English listening, speaking, and understanding through emotional real-life stories, then stay with this channel. Because many more powerful stories are coming. Stories about life in America. Stories about love, family, culture, and real human experiences. Stories that help you learn English naturally, slowly, and confidently. So make sure to subscribe, like the video, and share it with someone who is learning English too. And in the comments, tell me something simple. What small moment changed your life? Your story might inspire someone else here. Until the next story, keep listening, keep speaking, and keep believing in your journey. Because sometimes, a single smile can start an entirely new life.